Hey everybody, it's Jason Cruz from MMA Payout. Once again, we're doing something a little different. This time it's the interview, and it's with the MMA Journalist of the Year for 2021. From what I hear on the social media, it's MMA Fighting Steven Marrocco. Steve, how you doing?
Good. How about you?
Now we know each other from Twitter and stuff. So this is the first time I actually talked to you in person. But do you go by Steven or Steve?
Steven.
Steven. Okay. Also, you live in Oregon. Is that correct?
Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon. We're just like a state away. How did you choose that unfortunate place?
Well, I'm from Eugene, so I
Oh
started.
no, even worse.
Yeah, I
No.
started small, and then I built up to Portland.
I have been to you. Well, I say that because I kid you because I attended the University of Washington, and Eugene, of course, is central to all things evil. From
You're used to heartache, is what you're saying.
yes, yes, yeah. We actually we actually are. So anyway, the reason why we're here is your article from last week, "The Cost of Being King," on MMAfighting.com. I suggest you guys take some time out to read it. Very in-depth, detailed, well-written article by you, Stephen. Tell us a little bit about the impetus. How did you find Spencer Fisher to do this? Just all of that. You could just start with that, and then I'll kind of ask you some questions behind that.
Sure. Um, so I was really close. I'm still really close, but at the time, Monty Cox was one of the biggest managers in the industry. He managed a whole bunch of guys. In the early UFCs, he had like half the card at times. So he was a major pipeline for talent. And Spencer was one of his clients. At the time, he actually contacted me in 2013 about Spencer. He wasn't Spencer's client at the time, but they were still seeing each other on a social basis. So basically, they would get together with Jens Pulver. The three of them would get together and they'd do these walks to try and keep in shape. And that's when Monty started to notice some of these symptoms that Spencer talks about in the story. This is obviously far, before it became more serious, but stuff like, leaving his cell phone in the refrigerator, forgetting names, stuff like that. So obviously that was concerning to me. And it came out in the context of he had tried to fight Eves Edwards at this event in Seattle, your neck of the woods, and was not cleared to fight. And the reason why he wasn't cleared was because of this bad brain scan. So me being the nosy guy that I am, I call him up immediately, and he basically tells me the entire story right off the bat. Like there wasn't any hesitation. But oftentimes in this industry, when you talk to fighters, you get uh, you get the answer, and then you get off the record. So he told me everything, and basically I couldn't use anything because he told me I couldn't use it, and I wasn't about to screw him over. So um, that was the start of a long relationship, where I would just call him, and I would check in on him. I thought it was a huge story. Some of the details that he started to tell me in terms of his relationship with the UFC and what he was expected to do in relation to this agreement. I just thought it was a huge story, and I just kept calling him. I would make it sort of like a yearly thing to call him, and he would tell me no, and tell me more stuff that had happened, and then end his conversations, or his our time with "this is all off the record." And so I just kept at it. And then really what advanced this story wasn't sort of this change of heart, or some, like, you know
Revelation.
attack of conscience or revelation. I mean, it was really just because he'd given up on getting help from Dana. And so he said he wanted to go on the record. I said, great. I started booking tickets, and then the pandemic hit. So it took a long, long time, but that's sort of the genesis of how it got started.
Yeah. So let me ask you about the you continued to call Spencer, and was he okay with confiding in you? I would, in this day and age, it would seem as though a reporter calls you. There's a little bit of a guarded sense when talking to people. How did he just? I mean, aside from the fact that he said okay off the record, but he still apparently revealed a lot.
Yeah, I think that he wanted to tell his story. I think that he wanted to unburden himself, and he wanted to ultimately, what it turned into was, from wanting to unburden yourself to wanting to help other people and to send a message to the next generation of the fighters. But I will say that just in general, a lot of fighters, this is a different industry than others. I'm not. This is the industry that I've worked in for over a decade, so I don't know honestly how it works normally. I assume that everyone is going to be guarded and is not going to tell me anything, and I'm going to have to fight for every little bit. In MMA, in the normal world, in the MMA world, it's a little bit different for a couple of different reasons. One, there's a lot of journalists that call up and they will talk and talk and talk off the record, and it's more like a bro conversation, and there's a negotiation for what goes on the record and what doesn't. And I think a lot of fighters have developed an expectation over the years that they can say certain things and they can control the narrative in terms of what gets out there and what doesn't. For Spencer, it wasn't, I don't know if it was that simple. It was just more the fact that, you have these conversations sometimes, and then your source just at the end of it says off the record. And because if he says off the record, I can't use it. That's the rule. So I think that's one of the reasons why I just kept calling him, because I think I believed that eventually he would want to tell his story, and eventually something like this would happen. Eventually he'd figure out that the cavalry wasn't coming, so to speak.
Yeah. So, obviously everybody should go check out, read the story, because it goes very in depth about an agreement of sorts with Dana White, in which he would send monthly payments to Spencer, and Spencer wanted to work for this money. Once you realized that he wanted to tell the story and go on the record, at what point did you say, I need to go across the country and visit him?
Pretty much from the second he said yes, because he flip-flopped so many times. Like later on, in the 2015, 16, 17, he just kept flip-flopping. He was really wrestling with it. He wanted to talk, but he didn't want to get in trouble. He didn't want to jeopardize his standing in the company. So there was, first of all, the financial motivation. He did not want to, literally shut off the only thing he had as far as, or his main source of revenue. And then there's another, incentive, which is like, I don't want to be that guy. Like, there's a powerful thing that happens with fighters when they're conditioned to be the toughest guys for years and years and years. And you ask them to reveal themselves in a way that's more vulnerable. A lot of them have cultivated this image, and, in Spencer's case, rightly so, one of the toughest guys in the sport, always a guy who would throw down, just a gritty, tough guy. And to tell this story, he kind of had to break from that conception and say, I'm hurting here, I'm in trouble, and I want to tell the world what happened to me and that this can happen to you. So,
question, as far as the going back and forth to North Carolina, where he resides and runs a gym, or owns a gym, or runs a gym?
He co-owns it. He basically is, with his wife.
Okay. How many times did you go back and forth over there?
Oh, I just went once, and I stayed for 3 days.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, that was your question. I basically, as soon as he said yes, I was like, I got to jump on this.
Yeah.
But even in mid-reporting, he, sort of vacillated on whether he wanted to do the story or not. There was a point at which he withdrew his participation, and we had to sort of talk him back onto the ledge, so to speak.
Okay, so what was the expectation? That was the other question I wanted to follow up with. What was the expectation when he gave you the go ahead and you went over to North Carolina? and then you're having these conversations. What was he hoping to get out of this? And then was, as you say, fighters want to sometimes control the narrative. Did he have an expectation that, hey, I'm going to tell you stuff, Steven, but I'm not, some of the stuff, I don't want you to tell at people. Was there an expectation?
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, he was used to fighters, or he was used to like MMA journalists basically doing what he wanted. And what I tried to do before I went there was to set the expectation that, look, if I'm going to fly across the country and do this story, we have to do this story right. And I have to know, I have to see the documents, I have to see the proof, I have to see everything, as much information as possible, so that I'm not piecing things together. It's actually on paper. And in general, that kind of follows a trend that I've tried to follow as a reporter over the years, just because MMA sources are so unreliable. There's so much crap. There's so much crap that you have to sift through in determining what actually happened and the truth of, the matter on what you're reporting. So I said, if we're going to do this, you need to give me your medical records, and you need to, share with me everything that you know. There were things that he did not give me. I really wanted to talk to his current doctors. I really wanted to talk to the people from the Cleveland Clinic who are currently treating him at least once a year. But that became a difficult thing because, again, this is something that is very hard for the toughest guys in the world to do. It's very hard for Spencer to do. He was constantly questioning whether or not he was doing the right thing, whether it was worth it to talk to a reporter, whether it was going to change anything in his life, and whether it was worthwhile. And I did not get everything that I wanted in terms of information that I sought. So I did the best with what I could, and I created the piece from there.
Now, as far as so you talked to 3 or 4 medical doctors. Or MMA Fighting at least did consult regarding the medical records. Now, was there any issues with HIPAA or anything like that? Did you have to obtain releases to allow a medical professional to review these records? Or did you kind of give anecdotally what was going
on? It was different for all of them. For a couple of them, it was describing the situation. It wasn't actually showing the documents, but it was actually just laying out exactly what I was in the documents. And then for one of them, it was basically procedural stuff. How is this supposed to work? When X happens, what's Y? So there were concerns for HIPAA. There were HIPAA concerns for a couple of them, and I tried to address that as much as possible. One of the things that actually helped me was that a couple of them worked in the fight industry, so they were more familiar with what I was looking for, and they didn't have the same level of concern that somebody who didn't have any experience with this industry would have.
I see. And how is Spencer doing now, present day?
He is, I talked to him briefly the other day. He's blown away by the number of people who have contacted him. And I think that it's been a positive thing for him. He was extremely concerned about the effect on his business. He was basically afraid that when this story came out, that everybody would conclude he was crazy and couldn't be trusted, and all of his students would leave him. And I told him over and over again, I said, I really don't think that's going to be the response. I really think the people that know probably know already that you're going through something. And when we started to get closer to the publish date, he actually sort of brought some of his students up to speed on what was going on. So as far as how he's doing, I haven't had a long conversation with him since the story came out. I talked to him just for a second the other day, trying to, ask him about who's contacted him and, just to check in. But um, I think he's doing okay. I think, you know, it's it's uh it's a weird thing to have your life just sort of spilled into the public eye. Um, so I think he's doing okay. But I plan on talking to him shortly to sort of get more details.
What was the initial reaction from the family for the Spencer and his wife, close friends?
His wife was said that it caused a little bit of friction among the family because there was a pass in the story where they were talking about what happened after they moved to North Carolina. It wasn't particularly flattering on its face, the fact that the parents moved away, and apparently the parents weren't upset, but like the brothers and the sisters were not terribly happy about seeing mom and dad spoken about in that way. But I think it's hard to say. I'm a reporter. They're not going to tell me what they're going to tell their family, and unless I'm really there, I'm not going to get the full story. But I will say that from what I've heard from Emily, Spencer's doing okay, and it really wasn't an issue with the students. That the issue with the students didn't turn out to be nearly as, it didn't turn out to be a big thing. Half the people in the school don't even read MMA fighting and have no idea what's going on in the MMA world. But I think it's okay, and I'm glad it turned out that way, because obviously I was concerned for him. You don't want to see the guy lose or have his one livelihood affected. This is the way he makes a living now. So I'm glad to hear that things appear to be okay.
Now, I wanted to kind of turn to you, because now it took you a considerable amount of time to write this, and I assume you have other stuff you're doing, other writing projects, and there was a screenshot you had of all the papers strewn about your table and everything like that. Can you give us a snapshot as far as the involvement it took, hours, months, years,
Months.
rewrites, things like that? How long did it take you?
About 4 months
Okay.
from actually starting to write to producing the draft. And that's because I'm basically doing a full-time job trying to run a site and also keep pace with the sport, with MMA fighting. Like, there's stuff that goes on every day that we just have to write. If something happens right now, I will probably have to end this interview and go and write about it. It's just the way that, essentially I'm a beat reporter, A, and B, I'm an editor now, so I have to actually write, read other people's work and schedule it and do a lot of back end stuff with the website. So it's like having it was like having two full-time jobs, basically. It's a lot of hours on my off days and
You have off days?
weekends. Yeah, I know, right? Not many, but yeah, it's a lot of hours on the off days, and any piece that I've done that is more than a cursory who, what, when, where is going to be done on my off hours. It's just the way it is. Mostly, like, we're the literary equivalent of like short order cooks. Most of the time we're just flinging stuff out as fast as we can get it. And to really do this story justice, I needed to take a lot of time. And also I had editors above me who were shaping it into like a piece that could be understood by a national audience, as opposed to just MMA specific. There was a lot of stuff in the early draft that was a little too inside, and they cut all that out and made it more general.
How was it working with different editors?
It was great. I can just say that I've never been involved in more of a team effort. Most of the time you do bigger stories and it's like there's a little bit of hand holding, there's a little bit of collaboration, but not like this. This was like a real, like, the entire team got together and made this happen. And really have to give a huge shout out to Casey Leiden, who's one of the more, if not the most well-known videographer in the industry, lucky enough to work on his staff. and he took my camera phone and turned it in, my camera phone static shot video, and turned it into what he turned it into, which I thought was a huge asset to the story and actually showing people what Spencer was going through.
It was the video that accompanies the story, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like that, the social clips, the social Alex Savis and Jose Young's, these great graphics where they were using audio from our interview and like putting that on Instagram and Twitter. Just it was really nice because it felt like a real team effort, and I felt like I had support. Not like that I didn't have support other times, but it just felt like everybody was kind of rooting to get this thing out there in the best way possible.
Was there a word count that you? Did you have to shave this down, or was this about the word count you wanted it to be?
It was, I think it was 13 or 14,000. So I shaved 3,000. Yeah, it was too long. It was too long.
Wow. Even for online, that's kind of hard to do. Okay, so Dan White was asked about the story, and to paraphrase he said something to the effect that it's part of the gig. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I pretty much put it out on Twitter. If it's part of the game, then we need to prepare for it. I've been saying this a lot, but I work in this sport. Like I get it. Like people beat the hell out of each other. We like it. It's entertainment. You can't make this sport safer. People have to punch each other in the head. It's not like football where you can do heads up, and minimize your contact. The goal of this is to concuss each other. So if it's part of the gig, let's prepare for it. It's real simple to me. If you guys are paying your fighters between 15 and 20% of your revenue, is it not possible that you can put aside a portion of that? Put it aside for a rainy day so that those who do suffer long-term effects, like Spencer, and I'm sure there are others, can get some sort of care. There are entities like in PBR. I talked to a couple of PBR guys sort of to get a sense of how this compares to other industries using independent contractors. PBR has a foundation, the Western Sports Foundation, that is funded in large part by PBR. They donate to them every year, and it used to be called the Rider Relief Fund. It's basically a pot of money and a series of programs to make sure fighters can get the care that they need psychologically, career counseling, medical needs, and then also just cash for medical needs and other urgent needs that require financial attention.
Yeah, that's the Professional Bull Riders.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Professional bull riders. And the thing is that Dana has actually helped people. He's helped a lot of people. Like in my former gig at MMA Junkie, I heard a lot of stuff. I heard a lot of the stories about how he helped out people that needed help. And these are people that, things that nobody knows about, like they're not public. We know about, like knee surgeries here and there, like fighters will say that the UFC paid for my knee surgery or whatever. But he's done a lot. He just doesn't talk about it. He doesn't like to talk about it. So my thought is like, if that's the case, if you're willing to help, like why not help these guys these warriors who have given their blood and their brains? Why not, put aside some money for the future to help them? And it's not just studying the disease. Like we don't need 10 more years of studies to figure out that this is a huge problem or this is going to be a huge issue. We don't need 10 more years of studies. It's a problem. This is head trauma. It's gonna happen. So why not do something about it now or set aside some money now? That's kind of the way I want to respond to Dana. I don't want to just, a lot of people have said, how it came across, and I didn't think it came across great, but I'd like to frame it in the positive where it's like, we can do something about this. We can create some positive changes so that guys like Spencer aren't just shit out of luck at the end of their career.
Now, you do make a correlation with NFL and football and as it relates to head trauma and things of that nature. And there were lawsuits related to the NFL concealing this information. Now, we don't know any lawyers in the house, but do you think at any point there will be someone floating around a lawsuit related to what is or what has happened to some of these fighters?
So part of the story was talking to Christopher Seeger, who was the attorney, was a big figure in the concussion lawsuit, and Spencer actually wrote him a letter. It's in the story. He wrote a letter to Christopher Seeger through a mutual friend. He never sent the letter. Christopher never received it. But I called him up one day. I'm like, hey, do you remember this guy? He's a guy who does jujitsu. So he's like, yeah, I remember Spencer, tough guy. And I told him about what was happening and what Spencer had been through, what the UFC's role and things have been. And I said, look, do you think Spencer has a case? Is there any sort of case here? Is there any sort of wrongdoing, or could this be an issue for the future in terms of some sort of concussion type lawsuit that we've seen in the NFL? And he says, not really, essentially. Like it doesn't look great. And the reason why, he said, is because the fraud element is not there. The NFL created the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee and released, tons of papers, tons of scientific papers, basically denying the connection between concussions and, CTE or permanent neurological damage. So in doing that, in some of these steps that they took to minimize or negate the risk, that's where you had a fraud claim come in. And that's why they had more traction in court than the UFC, in theory, because everyone knows that taking punches to the head is a bad thing. Even in 2007, this is part of Chris's point, even in 2007, it's hard to make the argument that fighters didn't know that they were potentially exposing themselves to brain damage. And that's the issue, basically. It's like, what did you know and when did you know it? And unfortunately, I mean, Chris was like, I can look at the case, the facts of the case, and I can make a decision. I don't want to rule anything out, but I wouldn't want to give Spencer false hope if he was my client.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's a part of the regulatory body as well to look at these guys and say, well, whether or not I'm going to issue you a license. If the UFC is, if you were the UFC, you'd say, hey, someone else issued a license, not us. So he was allowed to fight, and that's what happens to him. But anyway, enough about that.
Well, and also, how do you know which punch causes the damage? Like causation. How do you trace one to the other? Spencer was saying, like, his 2007 fight. He was saying basically the 2007 fight, he was never the same. But he also had concussions in 2004, and he had hours and hours of gym time at Militich, one of the most brutal gyms in the country. Yeah. So if I was a defense attorney, I would be thinking, how do we know it came then and not some other time? And how is that our fault when you weren't in the octagon? Yeah, most definitely. It would be one of those harder cases, but we all see unique. Steven Marrocco, MMA fighting, the cost of being the king. Really great story about Spencer Fisher. Well, thank you again for joining me on the interview. Do you have any? We're not going to talk about UFC 257 that much, but do you have a prediction for the main event? I actually haven't been asked this yet. And okay, here you go. Breaking. Yeah. No, I mean, I guess there's a thing that I try to hold fast to, which is that unless a fighter is significantly older than his opponent, usually the guy who wins the first time wins the second time, generally speaking. Sometimes it changes. So I would pick Conor because he's the guy who won the first time, won decisively. and I'm not sure that the adjustments that Poirier has made in his style thus far are going to be enough to overcome the deficits that he has in this particular matchup. So I would say I would pick McGregor. I'd put my money on McGregor, but I also would not be surprised in the slightest if Poirier was able to get it done this time. He's a extremely talented fighter. He's gotten even better as time has passed. And I would think if there's anyone that can buck that trend, it would be Dustin.
Yeah, I definitely one of the things looking back at that first fight and watching that fight, definitely maturity is a thing that I see much more in Dustin now than back then several years ago. But the other thing is we haven't seen Conor in an actual octagon. I mean, there was just less than a minute last year, but we haven't seen him do a full round in such a long time. So it'll be interesting to see what he's been up to as far as training goes.
Yeah. And also, I mean, Dustin has more fluid in his brain now, right? But that being said, if he can weather the storm, if it's not a one-shot thing, and if it goes into later rounds, I would say it favors Dustin.
Yeah, definitely the Hooker fight from last year, Hooker Poirier, that was underrated fight of the year, maybe third in line after the first two great fights the UFC put on. And anyway, Steven Marrocco, tell us your Twitter so people can find you.
MMA Fighting SM.
Now, did you buy that, or did you have to? Now, if you go somewhere else, do you have to relinquish the MMA Fighting like the POTUS?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I changed it from MMA Weekly Steven to MMA Junkie Steven, and now MMA Fighting SM. So any website that has MMA in front of it, I've probably written for it.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, there you go. Steven Marrocco. Hey, 2021 Journalist of the Year. Early ballots say he is going to win. Thanks again, Steven.
Simmer down. All right.
Have a good day.
Thank you.